Then there was the bad weather. A Moveable Feast, written by Ernest Hemingway, is a memoir to his time in Paris as a journalist. It was published posthumously, and is, by my estimation, for whatever that's worth, his most important work. Perhaps not culturally, but at least to Hemingway himself. It is made clear throughout the memoir that this is a very emotions-rich time for him, as it's set during his marriage to Hadley Richardson. Arguably more than any of his future wives, of which there were 3, he speaks of Hadley as a lost love and a distant, unreachable star. It's forlorn in a way, but entirely of Hemingway's doing. Writer or not, a lesson worth taking note of here is that having an affair with your wife's best friend is a quick route to marital failure. And, for what it's worth, Slow Writer does not endorse the actions taken in Hemingway's personal life. I'm more interested in his chops as a writer. This autobiography details his time in Paris during the 1920s, between the First World War and the Second. 1920s Paris was, by all accounts, one of the most culturally rich places in the world at the time, at least insofar as the Western arts are concerned. Innumerable members of the lost generation were there and are present as figures within A Moveable Feast, like the notable occultist and argued prophet Aleister Crowley, Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, and Gertrude Stein, to name a few. You may have read some Ernest Hemingway in high school or college, such as For Whom the Bell Tolls or maybe A Farewell to Arms. I have empirically sound anecdotal evidence that most high schoolers did not and do not like Ernest Hemingway. They tend to find him altogether too boring, which is a fair critique to levy against his rather stoic American style, though I believe there is a lot to appreciate about his work. He is, after all, the quintessential American Sigma male. He hates purple prose, he loves the truth, and is debatably anti-Semitic. He's also an absolute womanizer, though I suppose that depends on who you ask. His works and his words are intoxicating. Even if you hate him, it's difficult not to at least appreciate the way he writes, if not the words. The sound of it, the quote-unquote honesty of it. So it's always stood out to me that this book, one of such great importance to Hemingway and France at the time, was given such a simple, coy opener. Then there was the bad weather. 6 words, 25 letters. Simple, elegant, and yet mysterious. There's something special here, and a lesson to be learned that we can use in our own writing. That lesson is ambiguity. Ambiguity is often levied as a critique against narratives and plots that lack the necessary detail for those to function. But ambiguity is not a solid construct, and the dose makes the poison in writing as much as in medicine. Too much ambiguity and your work falls apart. In fact, you might not even have words at all. But too little ambiguity, and you get the forensic certified public accountant and the cremated 64 squares financial statements. That's a masterclass in what not to do. The opening of A Moveable Feast is indirectly conversational. It's ambiguous, and there's a whole host of discussion implied to have occurred before that statement was made. It's almost as if these words aren't the first words we're supposed to read. Imagine Paris was miserable. I lost my lover, my friends, my purpose. Then there was the bad weather. Sort of like Don't Let Me Get Started, but written with some poetic license. This kind of conversational ambiguity is an incredibly powerful tool, and works as well as it does here because it gives the reader's mind room to breathe and wander both forward and backward. Think negative space in a photograph, or in a painting, or the room between notes in a song. Without emptiness, art tends to lose meaning. It becomes too harsh, it becomes too much, it becomes chaos. But for now, let's let temporality be damned, and have all that's left be, there was the bad weather. That sentence, in and of itself, is quite mundane. It is conversational in tone, though the phrase is slightly dramatized due to this text being a memoir, and therefore centered on the past. It reminds me a lot of the oft-mocked sentence by Edward Bulwer Lytton, "It was a dark and stormy night," which is, because of its purple prose, considered quite bad. Or, if not bad, at least the poster child for purple prose. Hemingway, as opposed to using flowery language with two adjectives, pushes forth with his style and uses just one: bad. There is no dark, there is no stormy, nor is there any mention of the night, just that the weather was bad. It's quite simple in that way. This makes the text human and grounded. It removes the qualities that might raise it into the realm of the fantastical, because as aforementioned, Hemingway is trying to realize this time with Hadley. There is no need to make the writing purple, nor fantastical, for Moveable Feast is not trying to create a drama nor a show. It is trying to recreate reality, or at least Hemingway's rose-tinted one. Compare "Then There Was the Bad Weather" to the opening sentence of William Gibson's Neuromancer. The sky above the port was the color of television, tuned to a dead channel. This sentence is, on the scale of ambiguity, more disambiguous than not. Certainly less ambiguous than Hemingway's. There is not much of a conversation here, and yet this opening passage is heralded as phenomenal, so clearly conversational ambiguity isn't the only way to achieve literary success. But what are the specific differences? "Then There Was the Bad Weather" tells us almost nothing aside from the fact that there was bad weather. That's it. The sky above the port was the color of television tuned to a dead channel tells us just about everything we need to know. There's this port with a sky, and most everybody knows what that looks like, but this sky is gray and black, like the static of a television trying to reach a dead channel for which there is no broadcaster. That's a specific image. It even gives us some headway into recognizing what kind of work we're dealing with, at least to the familiar audience. The imagery is evocative of the grungy subsect of the science fiction genre, cyberpunk. It's unambiguous and non-conversational, and it shows us its hand. It's worth noting that Hemingway's technique here works so well as it does due to the nature of A Moveable Feast. It's a memoir, an autobiography, and is supposed to be somewhat conversational, as it's a retelling. The point to be made and the lesson to be learned is that there is strength in simplicity and justification for ambiguity. I've never met a writer, not in academia or my personal life, who has once said to me, "My favorite part of writing is the first sentence." More often than not, at least in academia, it's the end of the work, because at that point the writer can say, "I'm done," and throw up their pen, their pencil, or their keyboard. So in our works, perhaps in scenes where two characters are having a discussion, or where a chapter begins in a nostalgic affect, we can look to Hemingway's A Moveable Feast as an exemplar in conversational ambiguity. We can write out that scene in its entirety, look at it and say, maybe it would be better if we just erase that. Not all of it, of course, but just enough. Just enough until what we're left with is something like, "Then there was the bad weather."